point your browser to www.feet2fire.com. That's www.feet2fire.com. And check the left of the screen for the How to Participate text and click. You can then choose Direct Chat with James or join the official group chat room. You can send email to James at f2f@innersights.com. That's f2f@innersights.com. And now, live from Chicago, here is the Black Knight of Talk Radio, James Arthur Jancik.
Talking about the subject of zombies and whatnot, kind of interesting to pick out some bumper music that would fit. Hey, we're talking about Douglas Dietrich, zombies, and so far we've talked about the zombies from the zombie drug and its applications. And before we move on, Douglas, I had a question coming in from chat. These bath salts and whatnot, is there a possibility of this zombie drug being introduced to, say, marijuana or hash or anything like that?
Absolutely. It's a powder. It could be introduced.
But sometimes the powder, when you burn it, it changes chemically. I mean, would it survive smokifying so that you can then?
That's an excellent point. But my understanding is that the bath salts are ingested already in any number of creative ways. That they are smoked, that they are put into foods, that they are, like Coke, like it's.
Well, this could be the ultimate paraquat. They by simply putting this stuff around here, they can cause a lot of trouble.
Well, that I think is always a potential. I think that the only way to prevent such a wave of zombie pharmacosis is to introduce this information to the public, educate them, make them aware of it, because their government sure as heck isn't doing the job. So I'm here to tell you what it is, what's it about, that this is part of a insurgency by a foreign power, and I want Americans to appreciate the gravity of the situation. And it's through James Arthur Jancik's Feet to the Fire that you're going to hear the truth. So far, the first truth of this matter that has ever been exposed anywhere. And I say that I stake my reputation as a Department of Defense research librarian on exposing a security threat to the nation in this regard. And so hopefully the awareness can prevent it from getting any worse. I'm sure that no matter how cracked out or whacked out, there's very few people who want to become zombies. And,
there was a report on television the other day, which I rarely watch. Lucinda does, and I'll walk in and out of the room, and they were having, I'm glad I did, they had a news report on these people doing bath salts in Florida, and they had pictures of these people, and it was absolutely horrifying. I mean, I've heard of people freaking out from that angel dust. It was pretty bad, but I mean, this was absolutely horrible. Some of the pictures they've shown, videos of these people, these poor people, just totally freaking out, just totally.
Well, it reminds me of PCP in the sense that PCP is an elephant tranquilizer. It was originally a zoologist's drug, not a veterinarian's drug, mind you. It was a zoologist's drug, and it was meant for tranquilizing elephants, which veterinarians do not normally contend with. Mostly zoologists will deal with elephants. So we're talking about an extremely powerful narcotic, and PCP was used recreationally during the 1990s when I worked the highest-paid uniform security contract in the United States, which was the Acorn Projects in West Oakland, 762 units, 10 square city blocks. Totally different place now because we were working on it before it was a gated community. We actually had to vacate the population from one end of the project to the other as they ultimately surrounded it by gates so they could basically attempt to control who entered and who left and also lock all of the population inside in the event of riots. So during that process that I worked in that security contract, one of the PCP users that I had come across, I was dispatched normally I used to walk the field. In my first contract, my second contract, I was dispatch, and that was the most dangerous position because I was in the office where we had the prison. We had our own prison. Acorn had its own mortuary. Just to put this into perspective for people, and we had our own prison, our own jail, our own holding area originally. And the walls were added later. That's what made it a jail and a detention cell. And so gangs would break into the office to release prisoners. So the majority of people who died would die in offices, and who were guarding prisoners. So I had the most dangerous position as a dispatcher. Well, I was actually called into the field as a dispatcher at one point when they ran into a PCP user, and the reason why was because there were only 13 people on each shift, and I always, of course, worked graveyard, and all 12 of the other men were on top of this PCP user who were on shift that night. And so they called me over there, and they were saying, grab him, grab him. I'm like telling them, there's nothing to grab. There's 12 of you on top of them. It's like a football crunch. There's nothing to grab. And they said, just get on top of us. Grab something of him. And I crawled on top of them, and there was just this one gap amongst all of them where they're holding this individual down. I was able to reach through it with my arm, and I was able to grab what was a muscle of his. I think it was a shoulder muscle or a neck muscle, and it was bulging so tautly, it was like corded steel. And this individual began to rise with 13 people on top of him. Now, you can imagine someone like the brain of Einstein able to conceive of the mechanics of the universe, and yet all of that goes out the window when you are witness to the physically impossible. There was no physical way for this man to rise. He had nothing on which to use as a lever against the 13 men on top of him. But PCP enabled him to do what he did. I witnessed another PCP user whose spinal column, the discs of his spine, were just audibly popping while he lifted a car. He was pushing the car up onto its side. One man by himself could hear the pops of the disc in his spine. He didn't feel anything. This is what PCP does. It's not giving you added strength. We would have men who would break handcuffs. I mean, think about what I'm saying. There's very few people on earth who can break handcuffs. And when this man broke the handcuffs, they had cut through his wrists to the bone. Now, PCP just kills all the pain. It's not that you're stronger. It's that you're not feeling any of the pain while your body is disintegrating under the impacts of the physically impossible. Mm-hmm. That's what PCP does. Paul Zombie is very similar to that. That was what made Toussaint Louverture's troops undefeatable on the field of battle. And so we're talking about this is a kind of zombification where the Walking Dead, people who have flatlined for at least a period of time and are reanimated, are not feeling the pain that you and I feel. They have the strength of those who feel no pain. And so when the United States invaded Haiti in World War I in 1915 and spent the next 20 years there were experiments being conducted on Naasa Island. And those experiments continue to this day.
Right, now, I do want to jump in here to remind you that we do have two other spaces to go here.
Yes.
So you might want to, because it's about 1:45. We got like an hour and 15 minutes minus the breaks and so on.
So I'll be happy to go there. By that, you mean the cannibalism and the prions?
Yeah, the prions. And I want to definitely get in here the neutron bomb creating these, and that there were troops stationed in the radiation belt purposely. And who's the only nation on the Earth that has neutron bombs now, and why, and all that. So put that all along in your little path when we get to it.
I think that's excellent. We'll do that. Just to finish up with Naasa Island, it is still maintained today by the United States, even though it's been totally mined of phosphates. It is still occupied, even though it's constitutionally part of the nation of Haiti and was rendered part of their constitution back in 1801. So it's still an occupied part of Haiti by the United States. Now, basically, the United States claims that it is part of the United States, though most Americans obviously have never heard of it. And this is something enforced by the United States Coast Guard per the provisions of Title 43 U.S. Code, Section 1458, by which the United States Department of the Interior has assumed responsibility for civil administration. And basically, the director of the American Office of Insular Affairs, acting under authority delegated unto him through the Secretary's Order number 3205 of January 16, 1997, and Amendment number 1, January 14th of 1998, regards this as basically someplace which no one can enter. So basically, it's indefinitely forbidden to allow visitations to the Naasa Island and its surrounding surrounding waters. And this is deemed per, I guess, the surrounding waters. As a matter of fact, I know for a fact that the line on the water is 12 nautical miles distant from the Naasa Island coastlines. So if provoked enough, the U.S. Coast Guard will kill to enforce that. So no one is allowed on the island today. And it is equivalent to what Возрождение is in the Soviet Union, which is basically a dumping ground for toxic weapons. And the toxic weapons that are left in both areas include essentially zombies, what we would term as such. And anyone who laughs at this or thinks this is ridiculous, again, they're just not. They're not listening to anything that I've said thus far. And to put this into perspective for you about the Prions and the Neutron bomb, because that's where we're going, the natural zombie as generated through Vuhuduns is meant to be a controlled individual, an asset of labor or war, but not some wild cannibalistic entity that attacks anything like a shark smelling blood. But what causes that? What causes that, aside from improper mixture of chemicals, as has happened with bath salts, is the phenomena of the prion. Now, the prion is known as, it's an acronym, and it stands for proteinaceous infectious ion, and it is simply a misfolded protein. All of our bodies consist of countless proteins. When these proteins get misfolded, then we develop this phenomena of prionization. And this is what manifests more benignly, if you can use that term, in mad cow disease and Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, also Alzheimer's. And it was first hypothesized by Dr. Stanley Ben Preusner back in the 1970s. He ultimately won the Nobel Prize in Medicine when it was irrefutably proven to be a fact. And I think that wasn't until the 1990s. And the end result of Stanley Ben Preusner winning this Nobel Prize in 1997 was that science was forced to confront something which, even though he had talked about it back in the 1970s, they were unwilling to acknowledge it because of the horrific ramifications. Because what science cannot understand or explain, for all functional purposes, is magic. And prions are essentially in that range of misunderstanding. We don't comprehend prions. We don't know how to kill prions. The only way to get rid of prions is to disassemble them at the molecular level, a nuclear furnace. But other than that, bleach doesn't kill them. Flame doesn't kill them. You could have fires that are close to the range of the heat of the sun, and it doesn't kill them. And they don't die. They last forever. They're not biological in the normal sense of the word. They are misfolded proteins of life, but not of life. They are the stuff of life, but not alive. And they don't reproduce by DNA. To give you an example of this, there are familial cases, by that I mean through family bloodlines, and they account for about 10% of TSEs, which are transmissible, spongiform encephalopathies. Now, to give you an example of how dangerous this is, I was a student of medical journalism for about a decade while I was taking care of my parents in their terminal decade. So from the year 2000 to the year 2010, essentially, I was taking care of both of my parents. And when I was taking care of them to advocate for them more effectively as senior patients, I took medical journalism courses at UCSF. So I have the credit equivalent of a master's degree in medical journalism. Now, they brought in lecturers from all over the world, and mostly UCSF alma mater, of which there were many that were exemplary and world-renowned, such as Dr. Prions. Now, I attended his lecture, and he pointed at the audience of 300 people in the UCSF auditorium, swept his arm and said, 1 out of every 3 of you in this room will come down with Alzheimer's. And that's a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. And that's the sexually transmitted disease of the future, the STD of the future, TSEs. And not that it goes through sex, it goes through anything. Usually transmitted by bite and or saliva, exchange of fluids, eating the flesh of something that's infected with prionization. So what exactly is it? Well, these TSEs create the spongy-like holes, the Swiss cheese of the brain, which leads to the dementia and Alzheimer's that we're so familiar with. Please don't interpret a relative suffering from Alzheimer's as being a cannibal or anyone who's a danger other than in the obvious dangers to themselves and others through their senility. Don't interpret them as a zombie. But the reason that prions originally resulted was traced back to the phenomena of cannibalism. And in terms of cannibalism, it was originally studied by Dr. Paweł Liberski of the Polish universities, and he basically went to New Guinea to study the tribe that was suffering from kuru, a disease which means trembling with fear in the New Guinea language, the Papuan language. Dr. Paweł Liberski represented the Department of Molecular Pathology at the Medical University of Lwów in Poland. And when he was studying the Fore tribespeople in New Guinea, Alzheimer's had reached epidemic proportions. And it turned out it was because they were cannibalizing other tribespeople that they had defeated and cannibalizing their dead out of respect. And when the practice of cannibalism was stopped, then the kurusomnia, meaning the walking dead phenomena, stopped. And the end result was, this is what led to Dr. Stanley Ben Prions' research to find out, well, what caused the kurusomnia. That's what led to the isolation of the prion. Now, to give you an example of how prions work in a way we don't understand, as I said, there are familial cases for about 10% of transmissible spongiform encephalopathies that are passed down through bloodlines in ways that we don't understand because they're not inherited. They stick with family lines, but not through DNA. And there's this version called fatal familial insomnia, FFI, an ultra-rare disease found in only a couple of dozen bloodlines in the world, in which the victim cannot ever fall asleep, not even when medicated, not even when drunk. The victim becomes delusional, erratic, lingers in a living hell of unending wakefulness until months later, exhaustion and brain damage causes death. Now, because it's not inherited, it jumps generations. So these are how the families continue to propagate. Basically, 2 or 3 generations down the road, someone will manifest it, but not by inheriting it. It's the equivalent of a family curse. This is, because we don't know how to explain it scientifically, we can only say it's supernatural. It's the functional equivalent of magic. And you can take someone with prions, and they don't test for it often, because the testing eliminates not only your ability to use the scalpel or the testing materials again, the bone saws, everything else, because they're all infected with prions, and you can't bleach them, you can't heat them. There's no way you can clean them. You dismantle all of them, plus you dismantle all of your suit, your hazmat suit that you're wearing. The lab itself has to be destroyed. So there's literally several levels of biohazard. There's 4, to be exact. And these 4 levels are basically for different levels of disease based on how fast it spreads, how deadly it is. The hemorrhagic fevers have a 100% mortality rate. Now, in terms of, they do and they don't, and here's the reason why. The hemorrhagic fevers don't spread fast enough. They affect the sufferer so fast they can't spread. That's why when you get Ebola or these various outbreaks in Africa, they don't wind up wiping out entire areas of the continent.
It's like when they It's like when they dig a fire break, so to speak.
Yes.
They run out of trees to burn. In this case, they run out of alive humans to carry it to the next batch of live humans.
That's right. Basically, these people suffering from Ebola basically wind up dropping so fast they're not around long enough to spread the disease. Marburg, Crimean Congo viruses, these are biosafety level 4 because when you are around, you can catch it so easily because the person has so many open sores. In a very real sense, you can say they're melting in front of you. And because their open sores are leaking all of this pus, just being near them, breathing in particulate matter from their disintegrating body can trigger the phenomena in yourself. The disease will manifest in you, you will suffer it, and you will drop. But it spreads so fast it can't create a pandemic such as avian flu, which basically has a 10% mortality rate. That's why it killed 100 million people in World War I and edged out the Black Plague worldwide, because it could spread so much easier because only 10% of the people are dying, which is horrific enough. Now, to put this into perspective for the listening audience, by measure of comparison, AIDS is a threat level 2. It's a biohazard level 2 agent. Basically, it will die on any external surface. It requires a very tight 98.6 degree temperature to survive. So you can have someone with AIDS bleeding, sitting on a toilet seat, and you could have an open cut on your rear end, sit on that same toilet seat after they left. The chances are extremely high you're not going to catch it because the virus would have died by the time you sit down, just based on the cold of the toilet seat. Now with prions, there is no level for them. It goes beyond threat level 4. We have to create this new level of biohazard safety level 5 for prions. That's what we're talking about with them. And so, well, what happens with the prions in terms of burying them? You can have someone like a cow or a human being infected with prions, and after you do the autopsy and you have to disintegrate the entire lab, the hazmat suits of everyone involved, all of the surgical instruments, everything, then you bury that body. You have to bury it like it's nuclear waste and hope no one ever digs it up again. Because like nuclear waste at least has a half-life, as far as we know, prions do not. You could bury a body with prions, 200 years later, you'll dig it up, and those prions are still infectious.
So, in other words, when they had the mad cow problems and they burned those cows, that really, the burying of them is the only thing that's keeping them from spreading.
That is correct.
And it may not even be doing a good job at that. But hold on, we're going to hear the music. We're going to take the break, and we'll come back and continue with Hour 3 with Douglas Dietrich on zombies.
Make sure you stay tuned, because you're listening to Feet to the Fire.
That's nothing I would request, actually. I told you it's kind of fun looking for bumpers. Anyway, we're here talking with Douglas Dietrich. Now, the subject is far from funny. It is quite grave. And it does show that there are some, yet another thing to worry about. Could be the worst yet to come. But it's good to know, and one can deal with and take action. So Douglas Dietrich is here. Douglas, why don't you give us your website information and let them know about your coming. You're going to be appearing and lecturing somewhere. So let's get all that out there before you forget.
Yeah, I really appreciate your bringing that up. Thank you so much. And I would like the audience to know, please reference www.douglasdietrich.com. Douglas is spelled with one S. Dietrich is spelled just like the famous actress Marlene Dietrich, a distant relative of mine. And all you need to do, if you're younger and you don't remember Marlene Dietrich, just put the words diet and rich together. D-I-E-T for diet, R-I-C-H for rich, diet rich. So just look up douglasdietrich.com. And we are discontinuing our DVD package as soon as all of these currently remaining DVD sets are gone. They will never be reissued again, as the one DVD, Roswell and the Rising Sun, which led directly to my mother's death, will analog into printed text format, will probably be undergoing cinematic exposure at some other point to counter military industrial propaganda films like Independence Day, The Battle of L.A., while I anticipate relating materials pertinent to the content of the other DVD, Satan's Crusaders, on delivering the opening presentation of the first ever event of its kind, the Super Soldier Summit #1, convening at San Rafael in California's Marin County on Saturday, June the 23rd of this month. And please reference www.supersoldiersummit.com for related details concerning that. The title of my lecture will be basically either American demonolatry or military demonolatry, basically the military aspects of Satanism and their effect on the U.S. criminal state as an empire. And so I will be speaking of what I speak of in the DVD, but the DVD is very pertinent. Mr. Jancik and I have gone over aspects of Satanism in the military before and how it's so influenced and subverted our armed forces. Again, please reference www.supersoldiersummit.com for details concerning that. But anyhow, towards this end, we are offering 2 DVDs for the price of 1 until depletion of supply. And certainly you can go to my website, douglasdietrich.com, big blue Facebook button. Just press that button. I'll take you to my public timeline. And on there you will find the accusations, the slander and defamation from John Lear. And obviously see how this has taken a new turn and a new development in terms of my life, a life in which I've experienced clinical death myself more than once. So when I say I don't really care whether I live or die, I really mean that. I've been dead before, and the very fact that I've survived without suffering the brain damage of Ram Halbin or Terry Schiavo, I am infinitely grateful for. I don't treat my life cheaply. And that's why I also emphasize the fact that I will sell it dearly if they are to if they're trying to follow up, and if John Lear represents some kind of governmental rattling, like a snake before it strikes. As I said before, I have the collateral information that will make many of their members regret the day they were born. That'll be released upon any news of my death. But moving right along to more.
But actually, let me throw in, now this book, The Reality of the Red Undead, is that something that should be? It's June 2012. Is that something we can look forward to soon?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're speaking of some of its contents tonight.
Yeah,
as a
that's
matter of
right.
fact, what I'm speaking of now, aspects of this will probably be in other books, and then there's the aspects that will be in that book, because what I am limited to by the context of the title is, of course, the reality of the Red Undead, the true story of the supernatural Soviets. As a matter of fact, I'm so deep into working on it that I forgot to even push it, because it will be released extremely soon. And my biggest problem, my greatest challenge, as you can probably ascertain by some of what I'm speaking about tonight, is that it's so technical in terms of the medical details. What I wanted to write, and did write, was a book that no chemist, no medical doctor could deny. The problem is no average person could read it.
Yeah,
and it was totally
there's like there's a way to say it, and then you got to say it so people who don't have the lingo. Actually, let me interrupt you for a second, and we do have a call coming in, and I had a couple calls that just hang up, so I don't know if there's somebody to hear at this time. Hello, you're on the air live with Douglas Dietrich.
Oh, hello, Douglas. It's Adam in Vancouver. I've talked to you on Facebook.
Fantastic.
Hello.
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, yeah. The reason I was calling, you divulge a great load of information. I find it absolutely fantastic. Your history is second to none out there, and you have a lot to spread, a lot of information to get out there. Now, my question for you is, you talk a lot about the satanic correlation with the military. Now, I know that comes from the British side, isn't it? Is that correct?
Yes, originally it was indeed, sir, something that started with the British Empire.
Yeah. Now, I guess you know the right hand and the left hand of guardians of the City of London, right? Did you know about that information?
Oh, is this? By the way, I think I remember your last name. Am I permitted to say your last name on air?
Yeah, well, you know who I am. You know who I am, right?
Yes, it took me a few seconds. Yes, but I've never spoken to you before, so it's great to hear your voice, and I very much appreciate speaking to you.
I deleted myself off of Facebook, but no, I just wanted to kind of touch base with you here.
Oh, gosh, I'm so sad you deleted yourself from Facebook, but yeah, not that I'm avoiding the question.
No, I feel uplifted that I have.
Okay, but in terms of the right and left areas of London, that might be a bit too symbolic for me in terms of being able to address it. A lot of the more esoteric symbolism can essentially, how would I say it? It's just not in my area. Because you're dealing with, at that point, not that I'm not unfamiliar with the occult, but you're speaking about very culture-specific geomancy. In other words, what the Chinese would call feng shui. And it's very culture-specific, and I don't know what was in the mind of the builders of London. And London has been continuously expanded. Obviously, it existed as Londinium in the time of the Romans, and has expanded ever since. So there's all kinds of history to it.
And it fought the French and the Spanish for centuries, and held its ground.
Yes.
And and had a little conflict with the Germans, but London has still held its ground, right?
Right, and I appreciate your call and question. Do you have something more specific to the topic on hand, though?
Yeah, okay. No, I just wanted to call, touch base, say to Douglas, appreciation for all your knowledge. The other question was now. So with the bath salts coming out, this being a new drug coming out on the market, what would the subculture be targeted as? Because it's got into the country somehow, or America somehow, like all the other drugs, they'll start targeting subgroups to get it out. Like, how's that going to all unfold?
We can only.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for calling.
Thank you.
Yeah, honor to hear from you. And thank you, Adam. Sorry he's off Facebook, but at any rate, in terms of targeting subcultures, it doesn't look like there's a target-specific subculture at this point, even though it's been around a long time. We're just beginning to see which cultures are abusing this particular drug. Now, based on just the most notorious example of the two men that stripped down due to the incredible heat, an entire inflammation occurs throughout the nervous system that is felt by people who have suffered from Pao zombie or the zombie toxin, and they wind up feeling as if their skin is on fire. Totally unable to move or maneuver at all, as if armies of insects were swarming underneath their epidermis. And this is what survivors have reported when they are rehabilitated to whatever extent they can be rehabilitated during the initial phase of the zombie toxin kicking them into the flatline zone. That's when they hear doctors, American trained or otherwise, pronouncing them dead. And so at that point, the inflammation might settle down, but these men obviously felt it, removed all of their clothes. They were both naked on the ground. They both looked Caucasian, though we're unsure. They could have been Latin American. But certainly I think that we can only wait and see. I think that this is not a culture-specific targeting. This is a military weapon being utilized on a front of insurgency. This is an insurgency, and this is a weapon of the insurgency. So keep that in mind and defend yourselves by not using it.
You describe the effects of it. It's something that these is this the same thing these soldiers took? I bet you if they took it once, they probably wouldn't want to take it again.
Yeah.
I mean, because if that's what it takes to go through the flatline phase, they probably wish they were dead.
Well, keep in mind that under Toussaint Louverture, these were like these men were fighting for their freedom. They were living in lives as slaves. And if you have a choice between your children's children growing up as slaves and suffering the agonies of hell to ensure the fact that they will not, most men would walk through fire, or any men who were worthy of the name. And these men, of course, were volunteering to be zombified only in the event of being mortally wounded. Keep in mind, it wouldn't kick in unless they were mortally wounded. because they
Right.
were administered a very small dose. Toussaint Louverture was a doctor of his age. As a matter of fact, a later ruler of Haiti, the dictator Papa Doc Duvalier, he basically was an MD, and he was world famous for fighting diseases. And he became a black nationalist, and he ran Haiti for a good period of time. Certainly he lived out his life. His son inherited the dynasty, and it was only after his son took over that the dynasty was overthrown by a combination of everything from Canadian mercenaries from the Commonwealth, American spies, and Cuban insurgents. The Soviets, the Americans, and the British hated him because he represented black empowerment, which was a threat to their interests in the Caribbean, especially in places where the British dominated, such as Jamaica. So remember that as a black independent republic, Haiti is loathed and hated by the superpowers of the world. And
It makes you wonder if that earthquake, might not have been all that accidental.
Believe me, the president in 1915 who wanted to retake Naasa Island for Haiti during the World War I period, he was going to ally with the Germans, retake Naasa Island. His name was William Sam. And Jean Vadrun Williamson was known as the half-year president. He was the former Haitian minister of war. And in 1915, as he was preparing to invade Naasa Island, suddenly, like something out of a zombie film, a spontaneous crowd erupted out of nowhere, came into the presidential palace of Haiti, dragged him outside, and tore him apart limb from limb by their bare hands.
That sounds like a zombie army to me.
And that was almost certainly American instigated, because the Americans invaded directly afterwards to restore order, supposedly, stayed there for the next 20 years. So this is the kind of brutality that we're dealing with on an international level. Now getting back to the medical level, when I was speaking of the prions, I think we've covered a good deal of what the prions are. How does the neutron bomb fit in? Well, basically, there was an individual named Dr. Samuel Cohen. He was of Jewish descent, and he was extremely well aware of what had happened in the time of the Third Reich when Adolf Hitler had basically overrun all of Europe and created an empire that was geographically larger than the United States in terms of land area. And the way he did that, through the blitzkrieg of his panzer units, well, at the height of the Third Reich, 25% of the Nazi tank fleet came from other countries. Talking about over 16,000 stolen British, Czech, French, Italian, Polish, and Soviet tanks under German colors, utilized by Adolf Hitler. Dr. Samuel Cohen said, as a physicist, what kind of bomb can I design where America can cannibalize other people's tanks, specifically the Soviets, if their armored columns were to invade Western Europe? So he developed the neutron bomb. The neutron bomb is an ERW, an enhanced radiation weapon, a tactical fission-fusion thermonuclear weapon designed specifically to release a large portion of its energy as energetic neutron radiation rather than explosive energy. The bursts of neutrons generated by its fusion reaction are intentionally allowed to escape. And so they're, basically what you have is an ER weapons explosion. And so it releases radiation more than it does a blast. And the reason why was so that if Soviet or any other country's armored columns were advancing, the neutron bomb would kill everybody inside of these vehicles and leave the vehicles unharmed and intact for American cannibalization. And so when he developed this weapon in the 1950s, he presented it ultimately to President Kennedy in 1961, and Kennedy found the weapon so abhorrent, he only allowed an underground test in Nevada. And that defeated the purpose of the weapon entirely, because it's meant to be blasted in the atmosphere for the effects of its radiation to have impact. Now, by the time of the mid-1980s, we had open-air testing. Now, why is this so unusual? Because all open-air testing of nuclear bombs and weapons was outlawed by the mid-1960s, by all powers in the world, all the Security Council member states of the United Nations, France, Communist China by that point, the Soviet Union, United Kingdom, United States, all had agreed to no above-ground nuclear testing. So how did they get away with it? Because it wasn't classified as a nuclear bomb. It was classified as an energy weapon. Now, in all of the classic nuclear tests, the Americans have always wiped out American troops as par for the course. They would have American soldiers parked 2,000 yards from the stem of a mushroom cloud. And these mushroom clouds, these nuclear explosions were kilotonnage, megatonnage. Yucca Flats, Nevada, they blew off over 1,000 of them. And they're so powerful, they would fog film in Rochester, New York, or Kodak Company Town. They would fog Kodak film all the way at the other end of the continent. That's how much radiation got blown by the jet stream, which apparently John Lear doesn't understand when he says the Japanese couldn't use it to power the dirigibles across the Pacific. I mean, if I get back into that, perhaps we'll have a few minutes at the end of the show, or certainly we'll have another one. But my point is, with the Americans, they also had sailors at Inuiatak, Kwajalein Island, Bikini Atoll, right at the heart of nuclear explosions, ordered to sail right through the stems of mushroom clouds. Over the years of these tests, 300,000 military personnel died of radiation. We're talking about, like, some of these people were literally 2 miles from ground zero, 2,000 yards from ground zero, however far away, depending on how soon you died. I remember destroying the journal that was confiscated from a Sergeant Riesenwerhim, last name spelled Warehime. I turned that over to someone who uploaded it on the internet. I hope people can find his journal. At any rate, he was 2 miles from ground zero in one of these tests, and they were wearing goggles. He threw his hands up over his eyes, closed his eyes. He could still see the bones of his hands because of the X-ray effects of these nuclear weapons. Then they were ordered to march into ground zero. They would come up on troops that were closer to the atom blast. All the sandbags everywhere were on fire. These troops are all vomiting. His own teeth fell out. His hair fell out. He was tested as sterile. And this was, I'm talking about right then and there, his teeth fell out. His hair fell out. He got tested as sterile about 2 weeks later. They would get rounded up by the boys in moon suits for research. Ultimately, of course, he died. So what does this mean? 300,000 military personnel, a third of a million people. That's basically the combination of Hiroshima and Nagasaki put together. That's how many Americans died in conventional nuclear testing. Well, in the mid-1980s, under Ronald Reagan, who loved the neutron bomb, the Air Force conducted a neutron bomb test in open air, had all the troops standing, blast zone radius, and this time the boys in moon suits had a surprise waiting for them. They were confronted with frenzied, cannibalistic DAFs. That was the acronym. Decedent Ambulatory Prionic Hosts. It turned out there's a side effect. The neutron bomb, you've never heard of it again for a reason. It basically generates what's known as an ERMI, Enhanced Radioactivated Molecular Ionization Event. And the end result is it instantly creates zombies. Cannibalistic, wild, feral, uncontrollable zombies. Vacuolization of the brain, entire degeneration into a cannibalistic humanoid, the likes of which the world has never seen. Worse yet, the same wind that would fog up the film in upstate New York carried what were known as PIMPs, prionic isoformulaic microscopic particles, all the way across the United States, dropped on down various towns in the Appalachians, various towns in the Adirondacks, little small town areas, and the U.S. government was confronted with DAFs, decedent ambulatory prionic hosts, taking over entire towns. Now you want to ask, how is it, why is it, at Ruby Ridge, at Waco, you got police units coming in and they just automatically kill without thought? This is where it comes from. Government knew it couldn't send in the National Guard. They sent in the National Guard, these boys are going to talk. So they grabbed FBI, ATF, SARGers, Special Operations Groups from these police units, the alphabet agencies, sent them in with the orders to kill everybody because they were already dead. You couldn't call it murder. And they wound up just trained, militarized as extermination units to the point where by the time they're dealing with human beings, they can't stop themselves. Ruby Ridge, Waco, they just kill everybody.
So this group was created to go in and find these zombies that were affected by this neutron radiation.
There may ultimately have been a specific unit. I don't believe so. I believe it's simply units of special operations.
What I meant, that was the purpose. The purpose was they found out this radiation is creating zombies. It's blowing around the country. They find out where the winds blow, and then they go in and check to see if anything happened.
Well, they know when something happens. Basically, all communication stops from a particular geographic area. You know something's up. I mean, there's one thing the government can't stand is when people aren't paying taxes. If you've got nobody paying their taxes or their phone bills for about a few weeks, a few months, you know something's up. They would send these units in, and they'd see what was up. What was up was people who should have been lying down, people who should have been dead. They went in there, and they finished them all off. And that's how they've reacted ever since. Problem is, how can you untrain somebody from reacting like that when they're confronted with this kind of challenge? Not that I'm defending them.
Right. No, but, I understand. I'm just saying that, so we have maybe stories of people in the mountain being weird and all this, maybe traced to some of these events.
Keep in mind, cancer never existed until 1945. After 1945, the world is loaded with cancers. We've exploded over 2,000 open-air nuclear bombs since that point in time. And cancer has just astronomically increased, and everybody just accepts it. Nobody questions it. Has anybody ever said, hey, why is there no medical record of this? No one in the history of mankind has ever come down with cancer. Suddenly we accept it. This is another byproduct, a hazard of living in the age of radiation that they've unleashed upon us in total incompetence and irresponsibility. The French conducted some neutron bomb tests at Rurotora Atoll in the Pacific, suffered the same, dismantled all the nuclear weapons. The Americans gave all of their neutron weapons. The Americans gave the orders for dismantling all of their neutron shells. Basically, they had four major types. There was a W79. Last one was dismantled in 2003. Last W70 Mod 3 warhead was dismantled in 1996. These orders were given by George Bush Sr., so it had to be serious. There was a W79 Mon Zero, and that was developed for artillery shells for use in the field, if you can believe that. They had to hunt down all those and dismantle them. Worst one yet was one you'll probably never even find on the internet, the W69. That was a strategic neutron bomb. You would kill off an entire city, theoretically, and be able to occupy it. Only instead, they found out you'd get an entire city full of zombies.
Oops.
Now, in terms of the end result was, who would be insane enough, and for what reason, to maintain an arsenal of neutron weapons? There's only one nation in today, in this day and age, and that's per Dr. Samuel Cohen himself, the doctor who invented the neutron bomb. There's only one nation today that maintains an arsenal of about 300 neutron bombs.
Now, before we go there, think about this statement. The United States had this, and France, and they said of all the abominational stuff they have, MK Ultra to these various LSDs infesting in the 60s, we can go on and on, right? And so they decided, well, wait a minute, this is just too bad to use, and so they dismantled all of them. I mean, even that alone is amazing that they wouldn't just keep some just in case, or for whatever reason.
I agree.
So that kind of leads up that who else would bother to keep this with all these ramifications? And well, actually, let's just wait there for a second. We're going to take a break. We'll come back and talk about the nation that has it, why they have it, and so on. We got another 30 minutes. We could probably talk for another 4 hours, but we can't until the next time. But hold on. We'll be back with another half hour with Douglas Dietrich. We had a tweet from a listener, Debbie, who has commented that the show is interesting and Douglas Dietrich is great. So thanks to her. And we'll be back live after this.
Make sure you stay tuned, because you're listening to Feet to the Fire.
I'm James Arthur Jancik, the Black Knight of talk radio and creator and host of Feet to the Fire. Have you ever noticed the high volume of commercials on most talk shows? It is to the point that it seems like topics are the bait and the guests are the fillers to sell products. I've made a conscious decision to keep disruptions to a minimum and provide more uninterrupted time for the real reason you tuned in. You hear guests with more time to make their points, allowing me and listeners to intuitively and intelligently formulate questions by having less interruptions to break the stream of consciousness. Feet to the Fire may be free to listen to, but it's not free to provide. We rely heavily on donations to offset the expenses of producing the show. If you like what we are doing and enjoy the show, why not consider donating via PayPal or a major credit card from our website, feet2fire.com. Or write us at Feet to the Fire, P.O. Box 511, Minooka, Illinois 60447. Thank you.
Fire video chat room. And now, live from Chicago, here is the Black Knight of Talk Radio, James Arthur Jancik.
Well, I was putting together all these bumpers having to do with zombies, and I guess I missed the last bumper, and perhaps that was something meant to be, kind of more of a positive prayer that we could begin today. And maybe the day might begin soon with this information that's coming out and people can act on it from people like Douglas Dietrich who come out with and let us know, and thus we let other people know, and it goes on. And then only through knowledge can you even hope to have a change. And we're back with Douglas Dietrich, and welcome.
Yes, thank you. And we were speaking about that arsenal of that nation in question. Well, Dr. Samuel Cohen, of course, was of Jewish descent. Now, whether he personally helped to establish this arsenal or not is open to debate, but it was he himself who insisted that the state of Israel maintains an arsenal of 300 neutron bombs. And on the basis of the horrific collateral damage that is ancillary to the deployment of these weapons, one might ask, why on earth would any nation whose leadership retained a modicum of sanity maintain a neutron arsenal? Well, the reason is because its radiation that's released is indeed so potent that it scrambles the electronic brains of any incoming ICBMs. The state of Israel, of course, the size that it is, as people have often said, is a one-bomb nation. Reality, that's kind of exaggerating it. A couple of nuclear weapons would effectively wipe it out as a functional entity geographically. Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, the Jerusalem, of course, and other areas, and the state of Israel, as we know it, is gone, and the people that live there have essentially been exterminated. So the only Jewish culture that would survive at that point would be the diaspora. So to prevent incoming nuclear weapons from doing just that to the state of Israel and the Jewish culture, they maintain the neutron bombs to launch as anti-ballistic missiles, a radiation shield, if you will, scrambling the brains by mid-air bursts of all incoming ICBMs. And the creation of a collateral zombie apocalypse would be infinitely easier for Israel to deal with its firepower as opposed to absorbing the incoming nuclear blast. So that there is a logic to that. Not that I'm saying it's justifiable, but that would be their logic.
Yeah, and and I never even thought about the closeness. But in order to get hit by a nuclear weapon, wouldn't somebody have to be able to throw it at you? And do you have any knowledge that any area, anybody within striking distance, say except for like the Russians, actually have nuclear strike capability against Israel?
I would assume that certainly Iran, the House of Saud, a number of other nations have nuclear strike capability against Israel. The nuclear weapons are everywhere. They've proliferated just exponentially. If you assume that someone doesn't have nuclear weapons, you'd be naive. Here's the catch. Most nuclear weapons need to be delivered almost by hand. So in terms of delivering nuclear weapons to Israel, it would be basically by men carrying it in, either on a truck or literally by hand. At one point, Israel did catch someone coming through the checkpoints who had a very small, potent, low-yield tactical nuclear weapon that was essentially being carried on his person, literally on a backpack that was literally so heavy the straps were cutting into his shoulders, and the reason they noticed him is because his shoulders were bleeding around his neck. So this was a suicide bomber, the ultimate suicide bomber. Now, the reason it has to be like that is because the fission cores of nuclear weapons are leaking radioactivity constantly. And these are, after all, nuclear weapons. And it rots and corrodes and corrupts the electronics that compromise the guidance system. This is why the United States made trillions of dollars, not billions, trillions of dollars off of you, your back and mine as taxpayers, maintaining a nuclear arsenal. Because every single physicist knows this, but they would never tell you that if they were ever to launch a full-scale nuclear strike, because people kept asking, how many bombs do they need? The Soviets have thousands of nuclear bombs. The Americans have thousands of nuclear missiles. Why do they need so many? Well, here's why. Because the moment they launched a full-scale nuclear strike, both sides knew over 75%, closer to 95%, would blow up in their silos. And the rest wouldn't work at all. They just wouldn't even launch. The reason they knew this was because they rot their wiring. They rot their
that's
electronics.
right. Yeah, they had to be highly maintained.
Yes, that's where the money comes in. That's what collapsed the Soviet Union. One of the many factors. That was a big factor. The Soviet Union didn't have a military-industrial complex. It was a military-industrial complex. That was its economy. Its entire economy was its strategic rocket forces. And that's what killed it, along with so many other factors. That's one of the major factors that killed it. They couldn't maintain that. Had nothing to do with Star Wars or SDI, Ronald Reagan bankrupting it. That's absurd. There were many factors, but that was certainly a big one. The Americans, same thing. And the Americans just ran our economy into the ground maintaining this. And every physicist knew it. All these popular physicists, Dr. Charles Schultz, who says that there are fossils on Mars, knew this. He worked in weapons. Michio Kaku knew this. He worked in weapons. Stanton Friedman knows this. He worked in weapons. Now, all of these physicists who get these public accolades, they want the kidney-shaped swimming pools. They want the blonde trophy wives. So they went along with a scam. They truly are corrupt. They truly are evil. They truly deserve no sympathy or any kind of affinity. They have basically corrupted your nation. They've changed the entire business of science and the entire science of business to basically maintain this nuclear arsenal that would never work. And they knew it. And they didn't care because they were living fat and still are living fat. And if it takes lying to you and saying, yeah, there's aliens, and they were here, and we got secret technology just to promote their lifestyle, believe me, they have no qualms about doing it. They had no qualms about bankrupting the future of your children's children over this. Now, all of these nuclear weapons that were never meant to work, just meant to rot so they could repair them again and again and again. Anybody who works on an Air Force base, it's near a missile silo, will tell you this. Because the Air Force maintained it. The Air Force is the most corrupt of all the service branches. They are truly treasonous. To give you an example of this, in 1961, the Strategic Air Command came up to President Kennedy, and they said, Mr. President, the Soviets have thousands of ICBMs ready to launch, about 2,000 of them. And they said, here, and they showed them all of these photographs from U-2's reconnaissance satellites, and we had reconnaissance satellites in 1961. And they showed them all of these photos, and they pointed to every single grain silo, every single war memorial, every single church spire, and they said, that's an ICBM, that's an ICBM, that's an ICBM ready to launch. Well, now, undeniably, no one can refute this. 1961, the very year they were telling Kennedy that, they knew for a fact that the Soviet Union had 4, count them, 4 operational ICBMs. And they were so confident because they knew this, that the launch code for their ICBMs was, guess what? What would you say their launch code was? Because they knew they were never going to suffer a nuclear attack. It was all zeros. It was 8 zeros for all of their launch codes, so that no one would ever have to think that all of the flyboys who never flew bombers anymore, all of the Strategic Air Command that was supposed to bomb the heck out of any enemy nation, wound up crawling underground, sitting in the world's most comfortable chairs, watching bombs that they knew would never work. And because they didn't want to think, or, basically they weren't worried about a Soviet attack, they knew that they could attack first and launch anytime they wanted, because the attack would be meaningless anyway. So all of the launch codes from 1961, the time that they approached Kennedy, all the way up through 1977 were 8 zeros. And Robert McNamara, the defense secretary, didn't know this until 2004. And when he was told this in 2004, he was shocked. He had no idea. Now, this is something the Strategic Air Command and your Air Force kept to itself. This is treason. These people are traitors. When they came up and they lied to the president, these people wanted fat life. They wanted the good things that they could get only by ripping you and your future off. They've destroyed the future of your children to carry this off. So have no sympathies for them. They are not patriots. They are not on your side. Most of all, they're not doing what they're paid to do. They're not defending you. And the end result about all of these bombs and everything else about them is, okay, let's look at something practical. How come China was a superpower? Initially, China became a superpower by sheer manpower. Sheer manpower brought China into the nuclear age without nuclear bombs, because they could absorb multiple nuclear attacks and keep on coming. Then they developed nuclear weapons. And suddenly they're a superpower with 200 nuclear weapons. Between 150 to 300 nuclear weapons is all that China's ever had. That's all it's got today. And you have to ask yourself, how do they get away with it? Because they use the cutting edge of German World War II era Peenemünde Raketen technology, same as the Reich had, and they have clockwork mechanisms for the nuclear warheads. And they just send in the men with moon suits every few months to rewind them. And they don't rot. So they're fixed aim. This is pointed at Chicago. All it can hit is Chicago. But it's going to hit Chicago. They got one that'll hit Canberra, one that'll hit Tokyo. They'll have all these bombs, just a few hundred of them, pointed at a few hundred targets on the Earth, and it'll make it there on a clockwork mechanism. And all the electronic BS, garbage about, we can make it do spirals in flight. We can recall it halfway to its target. All this stuff was a lie anyway, and none of it could be done. In China's case, they have a nuclear arsenal that can work. And guess what? Notice the difference in economy. Whereas the Soviet Union has collapsed and the United States is in collapse, China's economy is roaring because it hasn't surrendered to its military-industrial complex and this nuclear scam. So I hope that puts that in perspective. Now, we've covered the Prionism, and this is a result, ultimately, of cannibalization. It produces cannibalization, and ironically, it was produced by a radiation bomb that was meant to provide the ability to cannibalize machines or even real estate. The ultimate capitalist weapon, if you will.
Well, I don't really realize. I do realize when we talk like this, how serious Eisenhower was with his statement. I mean, you hear it, and anecdotally, you talk about, there's a war race and all that, but it really was a scam war race, and it broke our backs. And who goes away with all the money?
Well, the U.S. Air Force, the physicists, more than anyone else. It's a conspiracy of a military science industrial complex. And we, instead of going into a direction where we could have developed genetics, if we had given biologists full run and provided them with that much money, we would have immortality by now. Just by sheer genetic engineering, we would be able to prolong our lives if we had put that much energy into it. But we gave it all to the physicists. And what do we have? We don't have flying cars. We don't have nuclear-powered planes. We don't have nuclear-powered mobility. We have nothing they promised us. All we have is a broken economy because basically they took everything and they stole it. And so this is all based on the American myth that the atomic bombs won the war. Everything's based on, well, it stopped the war. Well, I'll give you an example of how phony that is. I was talking earlier about if John Lear was so hot, how come the Vietnam air battles produced so many American pilots being shot down? Why wasn't he in the lines with the fighter pilots? Well, because he's a rich guy's son and he's flying drugs for the CIA. Now you take a look at Nixon. Nixon knew the score because he was involved with trying to start Operation Vulture. And Nixon, at that point in time, was under the impression, based on his being misinformed by the military, he was under the impression as a vice president that the atomic bombs had ended the war. So on March 20th of 1954, he instigated Operation Vulture with Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Arthur Ranford. And they approached Eisenhower, and they said, we've got 2 aircraft carriers have entered the Gulf of Tonkin. We've got B-29s ready to Clark Field in the Philippines. We've got elements of the 3rd Marine Division placed on alert. 100 aircraft were involved. 5 U.S. servicemen were captured by the Viet Minh at Dien Bien Phu. They became the first U.S. prisoners of war of the Vietnam War, 1954. Now, they approached Eisenhower, and they said, we're ready to drop the bombs. We've got the entire Strategic Air Command ready to beat them in Vietnam just the way they did the Japanese in World War II. And Eisenhower looked at him and he said, are you crazy? The Japanese never surrendered in World War II. He said, those atomic bombs didn't do anything. They were meaningless. It was a propaganda operation. Nothing was accomplished, and nothing will be accomplished here. And the entire Operation Vulture was closed down. Later on, Nixon never forgot that. And in 1972, December 19th, he approached the U.S. Air Force and the Strategic Air Command. He said, you bastards told me you won World War II. Let's see if you can really stop a war. I want to end the Vietnam War. You've got 11 days. I want you to bomb Hanoi, and I want you to end this war. And Operation Linebacker 2 started. He said, I got a bomb before Congress reconvenes after January 1st of 1973. And I'm going to suspend it for 36 hours over Christmas. General John C. Mayer, win this war like you claimed you won World War II. Now, the only U.S. planes capable of winter all-weather bombing were the Air Force B-52s. And there weren't enough General Dynamics F-111s or Navy Grumman A-6 intruders available for the campaign due to chronic combat losses because their pilots kept getting shot down by Vietnamese air aces, by a Vietnamese Air Force that Americans don't even know existed. So on the night of the 12th and the 18th of 1972 in December, all these B-52s, they took off from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, from Utapao Air Base in Thailand. First night, 3 B-52s were lost to surface-to-air missiles. A B-52 is literally like a stealth bomber. We're talking about, for that day and age, the equivalent in cost, almost $1 billion. December 21st, 6 B-52s got shot down. Hanoi was able to claim it was a Dien Bien Phu of the air. 6% of the B-52 loss rate was unsustainable, given the relatively small number of B-52s available, and Strategic Air Command refused to communicate with the 7th Air Force in country in Vietnam because they were the pampered favorites. They were the boys who were never supposed to see combat. And in all, 15 B-52s and 9 other aircraft were lost over Hanoi. You know what that is? That's the equivalent of the entire 509th Atomic Bomber Wing getting shot down over Tokyo. Their combat performance was execrable. And the end result is the entire Air Force was a scam. What did they do after that? They retreated underground. They realized, hey, you know what? We just weren't meant to fly. And so they said, we're going to run missiles instead. And so they said, from now on, we're just going to defend the American public by going underground, sitting in these comfortable chairs, and pressing 000 8 times to do a launch first strike until somebody figures out how much we scammed them. Well, no one ever did figure out how much they scammed them. These are the boys who keep saying it's aliens at Roswell. I want you to keep that in mind whenever you think about them. Everyone says, hey, you got to believe there's aliens at Roswell. 509th Bomber Group said there was aliens at Roswell. Yeah, they won the war. Yeah, but this is what they're all about. I could go on for hours about their level of corruption.
As much as this is, again, an unpleasant message, it does give me hope, because if they were the Supermen they claimed, there would be no hope in beating them. But if there are competent idiots, there's a hope that they'll beat themselves.
Pretty much. I mean, they are criminals. Well, what they've certainly beaten is us. That's what they've beaten, is the American public. They've beaten the American public into buying their BS about what they've done in wartime. They've bought the American public into supporting them in peacetime. The end result is they should not exist as an organization. They are a criminal organization. They're an organization of traitors. They need to be dismantled, and whatever leadership survives needs to be put on trial in terms of from World War II all the way on up. I mean, let me give you an example of this. It's strategic bombing. Who organized strategic bombing? Back in the days when war was a gentleman's pursuit, the sport of kings, Teddy Roosevelt organized the Rough Riders. On their collar tabs, you can look this up, the uniform said USGV, United States Gentlemen Volunteers. Later on, come World War I, you had poor boys, comparatively speaking, like Charles Lindbergh, who flew in the Escadrille Lafayette, the French version of the French Foreign Legion, fighting the Germans. Now, who are the rich guys? They all flew in the Millionaires unit, fighting the Germans on the fields of France, taken off from the fields of France in World War I. Millionaires unit organized after World War I the strategic air bombing concept. These were the guys who originated what became ultimately Strategic Air Command after the U.S. Army Air Corps, which performed in World War II. Who were these guys in the Millionaires unit? Every single one of them was a skull and bonesman from Yale. That's verifiable. You can vet that. You can look up the Millionaires unit. You can look up every single one of their histories. You had to be a member of Yale fraternity, Skull and Bones, to be a member of the Millionaires unit. These were the fathers of strategic air power and strategic air command in the United States. And you want to know why it behaves the way it does?
Quite amazing stuff. Quite unfortunate stuff. But the difference between then and now is that we are hearing it, thanks to your work. But we are hearing it, which means maybe that might signal that there might be something around the corner that might be happening. People would waking up and stop to take this, combined with their disintegration. Maybe everything might end up with a whimper instead of a bang.
That's correct. And the World War II version of the Millionaires unit was the OSS. Wild Bill Donovan and a bunch of rich white frat boys who were mostly skull and bonesmen said, hey, we're too elite to be taking orders from some commissioned officer. We want a war to be an adventure on our own terms. So they organized the OSS, Office of Strategic Services. That was all about parachute jumping behind enemy lines, doing sabotage, sleeping with local women. When they jumped out of those planes, they used to scream, Geronimo. Where does that come from? The Skull and Bones initiation rite, where they put their hands on the skull of the great Indian warrior chief Geronimo, which was sawed off by George Prescott Bush Sr. and shipped over to Skull and Bones fraternity, where they're still skull effing this guy generations later, even though the American Indians want that skull back and have been lobbying for it for years. And so these OSS guys, that was supposedly the forerunner of the CIA. Not the case. They were dismantled, all went home 2 years at least, before the CIA was organized in 1947. They at least were about cloak and dagger, penetration, sabotage. CIA is just about shuffling papers like a champ.
Well, Douglas, that music says our time is up, and it's been a very productive 3 hours, and we can go on for 30, but people can go to your website, douglasdietrich.com, and can actually see you in person. Could you go through that real quick again?
Yes, on June 23rd of this year in San Rafael in Marin County, please look up the supersoldiersummit.com. I'll be delivering the opening presentation for that day. It's a summit like no other. We're dealing with the victims of MKUltra and mind control programs under the military auspice.
And we will be back many times, I hope, and as we continue to do this. Of course, as usual, this programs will be downloadable I'm looking to put out a YouTube version of this, would be very interesting. And I'm also looking at putting together a torrent containing all of your visits here so people can get that through the torrent system. Douglas, thank you very much. God bless, and we will talk again.
I look forward to it, and maybe I'll be here next time.
Yes, that's a little qualifier we should add there. Well, anyway, God willing, and the Prions don't rise, we will see you back next week live on Feet to Defy. Remember, it's Friday nights now, and here we go.
The ancient one. Oh, my old friend, the one who walked before, the one who walked again, the ancient one of old, with wisdom for the new, revive our inner sight, retell your timeless truths, oh, ancient one.
Feet to Fire is a production of IPS Media Works on the Jancik Radio network of stations.